As 2021 draws to a close, the Universities of Glasgow and Strathclyde Air Squadron would like to take the opportunity to commemorate our 80th anniversary by presenting this short film of our squadron's history. Put together by currently serving officer cadets over the course of many months, we hope that this will not only provide an insight into our history and allow past members to reminisce of their experiences during their time in the squadron, but we hope this short film will also aid in the education of prospective members well into the future. The squadron itself first came into existence during the year of 1941, but to tell the story of how the Universities of Glasgow and Strathclyde Air Squadron was initially developed, we will need to visit some events which occurred shortly before this, reaching back to the interwar period and through to the closing years of World War I. As the world began to recover from the devastating events of World War I, and nations attempted to reassemble themselves, change in public opinion, along with a declining economy, posed an uncertain future for post-World War Britain, and the decision was made to demobilise the United Kingdom's armed forces. The Royal Air Force now stood to have its personnel numbers reduced to less than 10% of that prior to 1918. However, due to the technological advancements which were driven by the war, the Air Ministry's new military and civilian responsibilities did not reduce themselves. In fact, the Air Ministry's new responsibilities would demand that it remain current with new developments in aviation. Even in the interwar period, Britain must maintain a steady and uninterrupted progress in aviation research, the founding father of the Royal Air Force, Lord Trenchard, was quoted as stating. It was thus determined that the most effective means of ensuring continued development within Britain's aviation sector would be for the Air Ministry to work closely and alongside the United Kingdom's academic community. Additionally, the Air Ministry now faced a new dilemma when attempting to recruit their peacetime officers. As a means of rectifying this, the Air Ministry began to recognise that a suitable option would be to fill a significant proportion of these posts with new recruits from the universities. When attempting to identify a leading academic institution, which produces world-class research and outstanding students, you would be forgiven for thinking that the Air Ministry's first choice would have been the University of Glasgow. However, when assessing which premises not only had a leading academic reputation in science and mathematics, it was determined that the University of Cambridge would make the best candidate, as it was also highlighted that the flat terrain of the surrounding grounds made it possible to establish a flying ground within a few minutes' walk of the laboratories and lecture rooms, and that there existed 3 large training centres all within 15 miles of Cambridge. As the concept of a University Air Squadron began to develop, the Air Service subsequently proposed that the scheme shall take the form of courses and lectures during term time, and detachments to the Royal Air Force units during vacation, and the fully fledged squadrons were then established on an experimental basis at Oxford and Cambridge, where they would be trialled for the first 4 or 5 years, and if deemed successful, then they would be extended to other universities.
Following from the successful completion of this trial run, the 1940s became the defining decade in the formation of the University of Glasgow Air Squadron. However, its development was not always plain sailing. In 1939, Glasgow University students, led by engineering student Alex D. Stewart, put forward a proposal for a UAS to be developed at our very own university. However, this was unfortunately declined. Instead, a section of the RAF Volunteer Reserves was opened. They intended to complete flying training at Grangemouth Aerodrome with number 35 EFTS, and aside from medical students, anyone studying at the University of Glasgow was eligible to apply. Not having had to overcome enough challenges already to establish themselves as fully fledged organisations, with the outbreak of war in 1939, all university air squadrons were quickly closed down, but this did not mark their ultimate demise. It had become clear that there was, in the universities and university colleges, a considerable number of young people who were eager to start their training for aircrew duties during their spare time at university, and upon realising their potential to support the war effort, 20 new university air squadrons were formed, including Glasgow, the following year in 1941 as part of the Air Training Corps. It was then in January of 1941 that Glasgow University Air Squadron then came into being, with its headquarters originally being stationed in a room at a building owned by the university in No. 1 University Gardens. As the war developed, university undergraduates were compelled to join one of the services organisations while they were at university. Glasgow had the OTC, Naval Division, and the Air Squadron. Those who joined the Air Squadron served in it for 1 year, and this counted instead of the initial training wing service. On completion of their first year at university, they were sent straight into aircrew training in the Royal Air Force. The very first student to join UGSAS was a young cadet called Ian Bolton, who upon entrance helped the staff sort out other applications for membership. In March 1941, the first normal entry course began training. Initial training consisted of traditional ground training and co-current air experience flights at Prestwick, Abbotssinch and Turnhouse airfields, which implemented the use of a DH-60 Moth, a Fairy Filmer aircraft and a Tiger Moth aircraft respectively. The squadron was initially parented by No. 18 Balloon Centre, and attached to the University of Glasgow Chemistry Lab was a link trainer fitted with panorama, which recruits made full use of. Over the years of 1940 to 1946, around 400 students were trained on GUAS. The Air Ministry also facilitated the development of new recruits by arranging special courses at the universities for young men who wished to serve as pilots and observers with the Royal Air Force, and for those who were regarded as potential candidates for a commissioned rank. These candidates were nominated by headmasters and selected by an Air Ministry interview board. The courses, called University Short Courses, were of 6 months' duration, and students joined the University Air Squadrons for a course ground instruction in service subjects, similar to that carried out at the initial training wing of the Royal Air Force, with the assistance of 2 university lecturers, Dr. T.R. Tannahill for NAV and MET and Dr. D. Chisholm, specialised in aircraft recognition. Glasgow University Air Squadron trained 3 of these courses over the course of 1941 to 1942. Throughout the war years, GUAS was led by a variety of distinguished commanding officers. In January 1941, Wing Commander Kenneth Harris Riversdale Elliott took his place as the first OC following an extensive military career which began in the Royal Flying Corps during World War I. During this time, he was known to fly a selection of biplanes including BE-2Cs, Bristol Scouts and Airco DH-2s. Later in his flying career, he received a Distinguished Service Order while in command of No. 27 Bomber Squadron. Following a short 3 months command of GUAS, Wing Commander Riversdale Elliott was succeeded by Wing Commander Robert Sorrell Cameron, whose career began in 602 City of Glasgow Squadron for the Royal Auxiliary Air Force in 1930. Shortly afterwards, he joined the RAF full-time as a pilot in No. 16 Squadron and No. 28 Squadron, before receiving a commission in 1936 as the rank of Flight Lieutenant. He later became a QFI with a posting to GUAS in 1941, and no sooner departed to take part in the Second World War. In 1944, he was awarded the Air Force Cross and then posted to hostilities planning with Air Headquarters in the East Indies. His illustrious career earned him the Burma Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, Defence Medal, War Medal, General Service Medal and Queen Elizabeth II Coronation Medal, not to mention a CBE for distinguished service during the final stages of operation in Southeast Asia in 1946. After the departure of Wing Commander Sorrell Cameron from GUAS, the squadron was commanded until February 1943 by Wing Commander Alistair William Stewart Matheson. Following his time at GUAS, he was posted to 106 Squadron and sadly died during a fighter affiliation exercise when his Wellington Mk3 lost its starboard wing outboard of the starboard engine, killing all crew on board. The squadron was then commanded by Squadron Leader Patrick Damore Lister until the end of the war, when Flight Lieutenant Desmond Fred Ruchwaldy took command until March 1946, who had a remarkable time during the war. After joining in 1940, he was posted to 603 Squadron as a sergeant, receiving the Distinguished Flying Medal in 1942 for participating in multiple sorties and successfully destroying at least 2 enemy aircraft. In 1944, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for displaying skill, courage and resource of a high order and destroying 7 enemy aircraft. He left GUAS in 1946 and sadly was killed months later while doing low-level aerobatics in a Tiger Moth aircraft. Squadron command was then passed to Squadron Leader Robert Alexander Innes for the next 3 years, a pilot who had experience flying Hurricanes during the war. In 1941, he crashed twice during the Axis air raids due to attacks by Me-109s and was known to have destroyed several enemy aircraft. The second crash left him injured and he spent 6 months in hospital, ultimately preventing him from continuing to fly. Instead, he trained as a flying instructor, being posted to Central Flying School, Hornchurch, and then GUAS. His time at the squadron came to an end in 1949 when he returned to Malta to reform 1085 Squadron as the new commanding officer. His time in the Air Force came to an end after his retirement as squadron leader in 1961. Another prominent member of GUS whose career began during the formation of the squadron and who is often described as running the show was Miss Margaret Sinclair, who became secretary to OC GUS Wing Commander Kenneth Harris Riversdale Elliott on the 13th of January 1941. Her unique commitment to the squadron spanned 40 years of distinguished service until 1981. She, by all account, left a large impact on the squadron, with one previous member stating, "We had a commanding officer and a chief of flying instructor, but when it came to getting something done, anything from a summer camp to a dining-in night, it was Miss Sinclair who would make it happen, and I suspect that on all matters other than flying aeroplanes, these two did what she told them to do." Miss Sinclair's early days were spent in Ayrshire, where her father was a schoolteacher in Maybole, and she went on to take a secretarial course in Glasgow. Her role in the squadron was far wider and the impact on her quiet personality more significant than her job title might suggest. COs inevitably come and go, but Miss Sinclair remained to carry on the ethos and maintain morale. Although the University Air Squadron scheme initially appeared to have come to an abrupt end at the start of the war, the establishment and future policies concerning the University Air Squadrons again became a matter of some discussion in the immediate post-war years. The war was barely finished when the Air Ministry arranged a conference to discuss the future policy of the University Air Squadrons. However, over the course of most of the war years from 1940 to 1946, approximately 400 students were trained in the squadron, and the value of these publicly funded flying clubs was demonstrated empathetically by the contribution made by former UES members to the war effort. During the Battle of Britain, some 97 of the latter formed part of Churchill's few. Of these, 23 lost their lives during the course of the battle. 37 were credited with the destruction of at least one enemy aircraft, while 3 were credited with 5 or more aerial victories. As a result, changes to the squadron establishment were implemented during and after the completion of these conferences, and the squadron's connection with the Air Training Corps was severed in 1945. Glasgow UES, along with a number of others, subsequently became part of the RAF-VR in 1946. Following the attachments to the RAF-VR, the squadron was given the use of Airspeed Oxford AT680, which was based at RAF Turnhouse. In March 1945, the post of commanding officer was downgraded to flight lieutenant, but this wasn't sustained for very long and shortly afterwards was returned to a squadron leader post. In 1952, it was upgraded to wing commander when, quite rightly so, Glasgow, in common with Oxford and Cambridge and London, became a Grade 1 squadron with an establishment of 100 students. The first solo flight by a student from the squadron was made on the 28th of March 1946, and in July a further change in equipment occurred when the squadron received their first Miles Magister aircraft. Over the course of the following year, until August 1947, the squadron flew Magisters only, before becoming equipped with Tiger Moths, which then became the squadron's primary aircraft of choice. Summer camps became an integral part of squadron life, and the squadron's first summer camp was held in 1946 at Scone Aerodrome. Over the course of the next 3 years, the camps would continue to run here alongside the company of the other Scottish University Air Squadrons. It was finally in the later years of 1940s that some of GUUAS' most notable trademarks were developed, including the approval of our squadron badge. The suggestion for a squadron badge was first proposed in 1941, originally proposing that the badge include the University of Glasgow coat of arms along with the RAF Eagle and Royal Crown. However, it wasn't until 1947 that the squadron compiled the final draft of our badge, which was composed of a white dove and a dark grey aircraft, with the motto in Latin which states, "Prepared for either event." The aircraft was not approved, but instead a sword was suggested, which conveyed the same message of war. The badge was approved the following year by the King, and on the 21st of July 1948, during the summer camp at Scone, the Air Officer Commanding of No. 66 Group, Air Commodore E.S. Burns, presented the squadron with its badge. Reports suggest that it was not a fine summer's day, and the ceremony was held in one of the hangars. Another hallmark of the squadron, which is still awarded today, was introduced in 1947 when Lord Weir donated the Weir Trophy to the organisation, which was to be awarded to the best all-round cadet in his first year. The 1950s was a decade when the squadron really took to the skies. However, in some cases, they didn't remain there for very long. Two unfortunate incidents occurred at the start of the decade in 1950. One cadet carried out an unauthorised low flying over Glasgow. He was afterwards discharged for unsatisfactory conduct, and on the 1st of June, a second cadet crash-landed at Fauldhouse and was subsequently also discharged. This didn't impact their future careers within the RAF, as shortly after being decommissioned, both cadets entered commission in the Royal Air Force for pilot training. The first squadron annual dinner of the decade was held on the 1st of February 1950 in the Students' Union. Among the guests were the Air Officer Commanding No. 66 Group, Air Commodore A.R. Wardle, and the Senior Air Officer of Scotland, Air Vice Marshal D.V. Carnegie. For the first time since the squadron's formation, the Easter camp of 1950 was held away from Scone, and instead it was held at RAF Dice. However, Scone Airfield would not be forgotten, and on the 24th of October 1950, the squadron was informed by Abbot Cinch that flying facilities would not be available for Glasgow UAS because of work which was scheduled to be conducted on the runway. In December, after various fields were suggested, a temporary move was made to Scone Airfield at Perth, some 70 miles from Glasgow. When the time came to return to Abbot Cinch, the squadron made a strong plea to remain at Scone because flying training had increased fivefold at Perth. This was brought about by the better weather factor and the advantage of not being within the Renfrew control zone. Clear skies here and relatively clear weather for Scotland encouraged the squadron to remain here for the next 18 years. The squadron continued to operate from Scone, and the intensity of flying was not only maintained but increased. In addition, the fact that undergraduates had to live together at Perth over the weekend done much to foster squadron bonding. The following year, the Tiger Moth's tenure with the squadron came to an end, and it was quickly replaced with the squadron's first Chipmunk trainers, which was delivered just in time for the first annual competition among the university air squadrons. The prize to this being the newly presented Scone Trophy. The competition sees the students compete in 4 areas: spot landings, solo navigation, aerobatics, and ground school knowledge. This first annual competition was held in October of 1951 and was quickly won by Glasgow UAS and soon became a yearly tradition. 1952 didn't get off to the best start either. During the summer camp at RAF Waddington, one student was briefed to carry out a stalling and spinning and a forced landing exercise. During a spin, he failed to recover and spun into the wood from 5,000 feet. He was seriously injured, sustaining a compression fracture to the vertebrae in his spine and a few minor cuts. He was then admitted to Knockton Hall RAF Hospital. After he recovered, he was discharged with the note, "unlikely to be an efficient airman pilot," a comment which was probably almost as bruising as his physical ailments. The Hack Trophy, which is awarded to the all-round best squadron, was first presented to Glasgow UAS at the annual dinner of 1952. Over the course of the next 3 years, we then won the trophy a further 3 times, leading Professor J.D. Mackey to present the squadron with a silver cigarette box as a memento for having made such an achievement. Not wanting to shy away from keeping up with the tradition and following from the unfortunate flying accidents over the previous years, the summer camp of 1956 had another unfortunate event in store for us. During the camp, one of the instructors was given a drill instruction to a student when, during the demonstration of practice engine failure takeoff at night, the aircraft struck overhead high-tension cables which were running across the selected field. As the decade progressed, present economies being made within fighting services promoted a review of the university air squadrons by the Inspector General in 1957, which resulted in Glasgow, along with all other Grade 1 squadrons, having its student establishment reduced from 100 to 60 members, and the period of membership within the squadron was limited to 3 years, except for those undergraduates who give a firm indication that they intend to go into the Royal Air Force on graduation. However, any disheartenment that came from these cuts was quickly forgotten about when in 1959 two students on UGSAS became the first Scottish cadets to break the sound barrier. The two students, David Hadleston and Gordon Gordy, claimed that the flight had been unbelievably smooth. As the decade drew to a close, the 1950s decided to come to an end the same way that it started, with a civilian tiger moth striking a cowling and the propeller of a chipmunk of the squadron, which was part, before a student then crashed a chipmunk into the River Tay. Following the recommendation of AOC 25 Group, the student was discharged with the note, "Service no longer required," and the squadron was another student down.
By the start of the 1960s, the Glasgow University Air Squadron was thriving, with around 60 members flying between 3,000 and 3,500 hours annually. Although the decade progressed well, with a number of impressive flypasts and numerous advancements within the development of the squadron, the 1960s began with two tragedies. The first tragedy to occur was the death of cadet pilot R.H. Magson on the 14th of January 1961. He was found dead from carbon monoxide poisoning in his bed at Scone Aerodrome. The funeral was held at Dundee Crematorium on the 17th of January 1961. At the fatal accident inquiry into his death on the 13th of February, at Perth Sheriff Court, an open verdict was recorded. Towards the end of the year, Acting Flight Officer G.H. Gowdy was tragically killed in a Chipmunk WK-623 on the 22nd of December, with the funeral taking place at Maryhill Crematorium on the Boxing Day. Although the terrible events were felt deeply within the squadron, the students and staff worked tremendously hard to ensure that the 1960s would be remembered for all the right reasons. The squadron took part in a number of flypasts in the first half of the decade, including 3 chipmunks flying over St John's Church in Suckyhall Street, prior to the Battle of Britain service being held there in 1961. Other activities during this time included a synchronised display of aerobatics by 2 of the squadron's chipmunks at the RF Lookers Battle of Britain air display in September. During these years, the squadron was equipped with 7 Chipmunk aircraft, and in 1964 the squadron was involved in a flypast over the new Forth Road Bridge, and although bad weather and poor visibility had forced the cancellation of the original flypast scheduled for the actual opening day on the bridge on the 4th of September, the squadron managed to successfully fly past 3 weeks later. There were also significant changes for the squadron between 1964 and 1965. The old headquarters at 11 Bute Gardens were demolished by the university authorities to make way for expansion of its grounds, and the squadron officially moved into 12 Park Circus on the 27th of January 1965, from Glasgow University Air Squadron to Universities of Glasgow and Strathclyde Air Squadron. The change was necessitated by the Royal College of Science and Technology, which was affiliated to Glasgow University, gaining its charter to become the University of Strathclyde.
The Scone Trophy was yet again won by the squadron in 1968, and to commemorate the Royal Air Force reaching its 50-year anniversary, quaichs were presented to all the Scottish UAS OCs at the Bicester Summer Camp.
On the following July, control of the University Air Squadrons passed from No. 25 Group, which was disbanded, to No. 22 Group. On the 26th of November 1968, more change was to come when Group Captain Maddox and Squadron Leader Wood, both of 22 Group, and the Squadron Commander visited Abbotssinch to discuss with the Airport Director the possibility of the UGSAS flying element returning permanently to Abbotssinch. This came in good preparation, as during the Christmas camp at Scone, when it was found that the grass areas were unfit for use this year, and all activity was on one small runway, which was unacceptable, leading to the decision to hold the second period of Christmas camp at Abbotssinch, and this is where the squadron decided to continue to return permanently. The year was to end on a solemn note for the organisation. After a successful decade, further restrictive changes were placed upon the squadron when it was reduced in strength from 60 to 33 student members, and the number of staff and aircraft reduced to 4. Membership on the squadron was also now restricted to 2 years, unless students were seriously contemplating a career in the RAF. The changes were to be all implemented by the end of 1969, and were not well received, with many squadron members surprised and dismayed at the extent of the changes. The end of the decade was to end on a high, however, with the squadron winning the Hack Trophy for 1969, which was presented at Turnhill by Wing Commander Rufal Hack to Acting Pilot Officer H.G. Mackay. Mackay was a civil engineering student and won the trophy for the 3rd time in less than ideal weather conditions. A congratulatory message from the trophy donor suggested renaming the trophy the Mac Hack. Despite some of the retrograde changes involving the squadron in the 1960s, the 1970s took off with major improvements in facilities for the squadron, some aircraft changes, and the tackling of some existential threats. On the 1st of November 1970, when, after a long wait, the squadron moved into its new purpose-built accommodation at Abbott Cinch. The new premises included briefing rooms, office accommodation, crew rooms, and kitchen facilities. The celebrations then quickly followed 2 months later, with the squadron's 30th anniversary taking place. Later in the year, another less controversial change was implemented, when the University Air Squadrons passed from HQ 22 to the command of the Royal Air Force College. The events of 1973 saw the oil and petroleum exporting nations, led by Saudi Arabia, declare an oil embargo, targeting allied nations including the UK, who were seen to be supporting Israel during the Yom Kippur War. University air squadrons were not immune from these effects, and as a result had their fuel allocation reduced by 50%. Their primary, secondary, and any additional tasking were temporarily reduced by 25%, severely disrupting activities both on the ground and in the air. In 1974, the squadron said goodbye to the faithful Chipmunk and welcomed the arrival of the Scottish Aviation T1 Bulldog. Over the course of the year, the squadron was to be equipped with 4 more aircraft, and all instructors had their first students out training in the Bulldog by April. In celebration of their new aircraft, a number of selected people were given flights in the Bulldogs, including members of Abbott Cinch ATC and the Glasgow University Appointments Officer. One of the first outings for the new Bulldogs was a 4-ship flypast over the Eaglesham Fair on the 18th of May 1974, and the squadron commander also gave a display in one of the Bulldogs at the Strathallan Air Display on the 20th of July 1974. As the decade of the 1970s approached the halfway point, 1975 saw the acceptance of students from Paisley College of Technology who were now able to apply for a position within the squadron. 1977 posed some unique challenges to the squadron's motor transport. On the 29th of January, the squadron found itself having all 4 of its motor vehicles out of service. Although the causes of these issues were mostly mechanical, with a Bedford van which was borrowed from RAF lookers breaking down in the centre of Glasgow. Another of the squadron's vans was commandeered and found by the police on waste ground on the south side of Glasgow, rather worse for wear. Bad weather in 1979 ran the risk of the decade ending on a slightly sour note. With the new intake of students within number 42 course unable to commence their intensive flying training at the start of the year due to the potential engine problems that the Bulldogs might face when attempting to work in these conditions, weather improved and the students were eventually able to take to the skies, ending the decade on a high.
The 1980s was a decade of not only cultural change across the world with events like the fall of the Berlin Wall, but vast cultural change was also seen within the squadron itself, with the first introduction of female students and many new experiences being undertaken abroad. The most notable event recorded for UGSAS during the 1980s was the introduction of female students in 1985. Initially, many current students were unhappy with the move, but the 4 women who joined 49 course, Rowena Sparrow, Nicola Tommaso, Lindsay Watson and Susan Beck, were quick to fit in. 1981 also witnessed the end of an era within its organisation with the retirement of Margaret St Clair after 40 years as Secretary of the Squadron, having worked there for its entire existence since 1941. During the 80s, students remember summer camps to Cosford, Woodvale, St Mawgan and Abingdon, and Easter camps in Kinloss and Machrihanish. The summer camps lasted 4 weeks for those with pilot cadetships, and 2 weeks for everyone else. The camps also gave students the opportunity to spend time on an RAF base, take on various responsibilities, and enjoy a social or two. Another highlight for students in the 80s was the squadron's annual participation in the barrel race. This inter-service competition involved a team of 4 students carrying a whiskey barrel from George Square down to the suspension bridge over the Clyde. It would then be lowered into a waiting boat, and the boat team would row to York Quay, where the first team would collect it and carry it up to the flagpole at Glasgow University. First team to finish were the winners. There were also regular inter-squadron competitions with the 6 northern squadrons: UGSAS, East Lowlands, Aberdeen, Belfast, York and Northumbria, summer camps at Cosford and annual sports competitions for football and rugby. During the summer, students would organise a scavenger hunt around Glasgow and Lanarkshire. They would team up and drive around solving the clues, and it would always conclude with a barbecue at the boss's house. Students would also raise money for charity, with one particular event during the late 80s being a highlight for many students: a sponsored jailbreak. They all began at Park Circus, in fancy dress of course, and in 2s or 3s had to attempt to get as far away as possible, carrying nothing but a 10p piece, the cost to use a public telephone to phone home. The winners managed to get themselves on a flight to Rome and got a photograph of themselves in Vatican City dressed up, rather appropriately, as a priest and a nun. One group alarmed the boss by phoning to say that they had ended up in Belfast, and another got stuck in the south of England, having been unable to get a flight back home, and had to hitchhike all the way back from Southampton. There were regular visits from serving pilots to the weekly town nights, and with it came the opportunity for a flight in whatever aircraft they had brought with them. One student even described an air experience flight where she was winched off the top of Ben Lomond by a Wessex. Every year, 2 students from the squadron, as part of a larger group of UAS students from across the country, would have the opportunity to fly to the USA as part of an exchange with the ROTC. They would spend 2 weeks being hosted by the US Air Force and travel across the USA visiting various Air Force bases, doing air experience flights and visiting tourist spots. In 1990, the squadron was given the opportunity to take some students on a staff ride to Germany. This was right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and there were still guards separating East and West Berlin. The students had the chance to visit East Berlin and also chip off a bit of the wall to take home with them. The closing decade of the 20th century saw many students progress into successful careers within the RAF and beyond, continue their annual traditions of summer camps, and welcome new staff members who would become part of the brickwork of THQ. The 1990s got off to a strong start during the yearly flying competition, which was held at RAF Turnhouse in October 1990. During the competition, acting pilot officer Alice Deacon of UGSAS rose to prominence by becoming the first female to win the aerobatic competition for the Scone Trophy. She then went on to have a distinguished career in the RAF, training on a number of fixed-wing multi-engine aircrafts before undertaking a multi-engine crossover to fly the Hercules as co-pilot on 30 Squadron at RAF Lynham. She flew support operations in a number of conflict zones, including Iraq, Afghanistan, Kosovo and Sierra Leone, as well as the no-fly zone in Iraq. In 2011, she left the RAF to train for the Baptist ministry, before finally joining the RAF Auxiliary Air Force as a Padre, and was attached to the chaplaincy team at RAF Halton, as well as looking after her church in Watford. The Bulldog was the primary aircraft in use during the 1990s, with training at summer camps in Kinloss, Cranwell and Cosford, and of course the flying element at Glasgow Airport. Initially taking on the role of qualified flying instructor in 1996, and winning the Bulldog Trophy for Best Student Instructor, Flight Lieutenant Galletly started his flying career on UGSAS, having gained a cadetship for pilot whilst studying aeronautical engineering at the University of Glasgow, and winning the Maguire Trophy and Trophy for Best Third Year Student. He then went on to complete a stint as an engineering officer, before undertaking flying training in 1988. After completing training at Kinloss on the Nimrod Maritime Patrol aircraft, he completed operational tours in the Adriatic and various other locations throughout the 90s, before becoming promoted to squadron leader to take on the role of boss as East Lothian UAS. Before returning to UGSAS in 2013 as a qualified flying instructor, he operated in the Gulf, took on the role of flight deck leader, and spent time teaching physics. Former senior student on UGSAS, Colin Nicholl, remembers a particular incident at the flying element with another officer cadet and Flight Lieutenant Galletley, when the student accidentally switched the fuel cock to off while flying over Dumbarton. As a result, the RAF had to modify the fuel cocks on the entire Bulldog fleet to prevent this from happening again. Between the years of 1993 and 1998, the squadron fell under the command of Squadron Leader J.J. Collis, who had an exciting career flying Victors, Nimrods and Jet Provosts, as well as the Bulldog and the Grob Tutor on UGSAS. Various accounts from students throughout the 90s talk of the staff on the squadron, especially Squadron Leader Gil McClooney. Often referenced as a legend and known as the Silver Fox, the students on UGSAS remember not only his fun personality, but also for his exciting career commanding 111 Squadron and flying Lightnings. Many students from UGSAS have gone on to successful careers in the RAF and beyond. Members from the 90s, such as Officer Cadet Craig Wilson, had an exciting career in the commercial air industry and is now an EasyJet pilot, regularly taxis past the flying element with fond memories. On the far right is Ewan Robertson, who after graduating has gone on to fly the Harrier. Colin Nicholl spent 16 years in the Air Force flying TriStars, Gordon Melville flew Tornadoes in the Gulf, and Steve Kurtnage is now a group captain who has flown on the Royal Flight. The end of the decade ended with the addition of another staff member, Nicola McNeil, or Adge as she is fondly known by her students, who went on to be awarded 2 commendations throughout her career, one from the Chief of the Air Staff and another Air Officer Commanding 22 commendation for meritorious service. Having grown up in Lossiemouth, Nicola McNeil always had a strong attachment to the Royal Air Force. She initially started her career working in an administrative role within the Engineering Supply Wing headquarters. During this time she met her husband, who was posted within the RAF regiment. They were then transferred down south together, where she was to take on the role of administration officer at Northumbria UAS. It was in 1999 that her husband was due to be transferred back up to Scotland, and she made the decision to leave Northumbria UAS. Fortunately, and just by chance, she was offered the position of administration clerk at UGSAS, a role that she took on for 16 years before spending 12 months with the Army and finally returning onto UGSAS on promotion as a squadron adjutant in 2016.
The new millennium brought with it a new era of expectation and excitement to the squadron, but it also seen many events which celebrated achievements from past members. The new century started off with the squadron winning the UAS trophy, which was presented to Officer Commanding Squadron Leader J.J. McGrath on the 21st of July 2000 at the Royal International Air Tattoo. The following year, Squadron Leader Andrew Lawless took over as Officer Commanding UGSAS and still remains a familiar face at both squadron annual dinners and at the flying element at Glasgow International Airport. The noughties also brought further change to the squadron, with Grob Tutors becoming the primary aircraft at the flying element. They first arrived in February 2000, with the following 3 arriving a month later in circus formation as a nod to the squadron's THQ at Park Circus. Shortly afterwards, in 2002, the Tutor was in its first accident at UGSAS, with one suffering from engine failure and being forced to land in Alexandria. In order to understand the personal experience of UGSAS during this period, it is best to recall the words of alumni from the time. Carol Moore, who was on the squadron from 2001 until 2005, spoke to us about her time with UGSAS. What I can say about my time on UGSAS is this: I made some lifelong friends. I'm still in touch with another 5 girls I went through UGSAS with, and we've been there for each other through lots. I learned lots about the Air Force, about flying, about being able to taxi onto the grass at Kinloss during my first solo sortie. There was a good reason that the aptitude test sent me to become a navigator. Drinking yards and building human pyramids, I got amazing opportunities to travel and do adventure training in some wonderful places, including Tanzania, Spain, France and Sweden. I learned to play rugby, not very well, and I was introduced to the aircraft I fell in love with, the Nimrod. I have some wonderful memories, and loss of memories, from UGSAS. By the middle of the decade, with the squadron now recruiting students from the University of Paisley, Glasgow Caledonian University, Glasgow School of Art and the University of Stirling, the total number of full-time students within the UGSAS catchment area stood at 44,000. Squadron Leader E. Harbottle took the position of Officer Commanding UGSAS in 2004, with the squadron's permanent staff comprised of a squadron leader, qualified flying instructors, and the squadron adjutant. In addition, the engineering support was provided by 8 civilian contracted personnel from VT Aerospace Ltd, and squadron administration is supported by 2 locally recruited civil servants. 2005 maintained the traditions of Burns Night and the squadron's 64th annual dinner, with the summer expedition being held in the south of France. On this trip, 16 members, 13 students and 3 staff embarked on a 2-week expedition, Ardèche and Auvergne areas for canoeing, hiking and camping, and the winter expedition consisted of a trip to the Cairngorm Mountains. The Marston Report published in 2006 seen change regarding flying on the squadron. Initial anxieties regarding the effects that the removal of elementary flying training would have on the squadron were quickly settled when, under the new flying syllabus, the squadron still managed to achieve 396 flying hours that year. Students undertook exercise Kintyre Cadre at the end of the year, taking place at RAF Machrihanish on the Mull of Kintyre. The 4 days were spent in a simulated battle situation, where 16-hour shifts were worked with an 8-hour rest and consisted of ambush, attack scenarios, and students were greeted with visits from Pumas, Sea Kings, Tornadoes, which some of the off-duty members were afforded a chance to fly in. The exercise finished, of course, with a hangar party. 2007 seen the arrival of Squadron Leader Steve Kurtnage, who took over command of UGSAS on promotion from instructional duties at RAF Church Fenton, and more change was to come to the squadron when it was rearranged into 2 flights in 2008. The 2 flights, McIntyre and Clydesdale, were named in honour of Lord Clydesdale and David McIntyre, both prominent aviators in the 1930s for 602 City of Glasgow Squadron. They notably undertook the audacious expedition in 1933 to conduct the first successful flight over Mount Everest, using an open-cabin Westland PV-6. Later, the squadron would adopt a 3rd flight, Houston, in honour of Lady Houston, who financed the expedition. By 2009, 2 new Tutor T2s arrived at UGSAS, with the ownership of all aircraft being transferred to Babcock, and the year finished off with a well-organised induction weekend for 73 course. All those who had no flying experience were flown and got a chance to experience the thrill of the Grob Tutor aircraft. The end of the decade also saw the arrival of the new Tutor T Mark I EA, with a new glass engine management display. Jokes were made that the new GPS moving map is obviously made for students, as you'll get a terrain warning buzzed at you when you reach roughly 19,000 foot. The decade of the 2010s seen UGSAS progress well into the 21st century, whilst also not forgetting many of the squadron traditions. The decade to follow witnessed squadrons continue to hold extremely eventful Burns nights and annual dinners, welcoming new recruits, as well as take part in many exciting adventure trainings, Easter, summer and autumn camps, and many sporting activities. The 2010s started off by seeing in a new milestone when Squadron Leader Sue Freeman was appointed as the first female officer commanding UGSAS in January 2010, also making her the first female officer commanding of any university air squadron. Squadron Leader Freeman joined the RAF at 19 years old, then going on to graduate from the tactical flying training on the Bay Hawk at RAF Valley and becoming an instructor on the Embraer Tucano at RAF Lantanonos in Yorkshire. Squadron Leader Freeman then continued her career to complete many further qualifications before achieving combat-ready status and entering assignment in the Tornado F3 to patrol the southern no-fly zone in Iraq, and manning quick reaction alerts in the UK and the Falkland Islands. Another reminder that UGSAS is not immune to the impacts of global events occurred in April 2010, when flying on the squadron was significantly hampered when a volcano eruption in Iceland resulted in the United Kingdom being engulfed by a massive ash cloud. To add to this, the squadron had also decided to conduct an investigation into tutor noise levels in the cockpit, resulting in a maximum number of flying hours being issued, in which staff and students would be limited on their time spent within the cockpit. However, a multi-billion-pound takeover of Ministry of Defence contracts by Babcock International later in the year did bring some pleasant renovations to the flying element. In February the following year, the course engaged in what they initially thought would be one of their routine rowing practices on the River Clyde. The practices didn't remain very routine for long, however, when 8 students soon became involved in attempting to assist the police in flushing a porpoise, nicknamed Clyde, back towards the sea. The students managed to claim their 5 minutes of fame as their assistance was recorded as part of an ITV documentary, Police Animal Welfare. The GTI this year commenced his pre-deployment leave on 5th of March and was detached to the Falkland Islands for 4 months, during which time he was hoping to host a visit by some of the UGSAS students. Unfortunately, and to the disappointment of the students, the eruption of a second volcano, this time in Chile, resulted in a planned staff ride to the Falklands Island, which was due to take place in the summer, being cancelled at the 11th hour due to the disruption of tripping flights. 2012 got off to a great start with 75 course attending 4 days of adventure training at Granton-on-Spey, where they would be able to ski, attend indoor climbing activities and abseil, and shortly after, UGSAS was to be greeted with their newest officer commanding, Squadron Leader Carl Mullen. Posted in from a busy EXO tour on the Nimrod MR2 with numerous deployments in support of Telek and Herrick behind him, Officer Commanding Mullen reported that he felt ready for a change to a slower pace of life with less dramas and considered a tour of a University Air Squadron boss as being just the ticket. The squadron was 60 students strong and produced plenty of opportunity for drama, but he quickly found the role much more rewarding than he'd initially anticipated. He claimed it's much better, far more challenging and fulfilling, with far more opportunities for students to excel, which they did on almost every occasion. Easter Camp of 2012 allowed the students to enhance their kayaking and flying skills, whilst also being able to take a look at 6 squadrons' Typhoon FGR-4 jets, which the students were all very impressed with. It wasn't long before the students were able to see the Eurofighter Typhoons in action though, when, at the following Armed Services Day, as students were completing their march at George Square, a loud rumble was heard over the whole parade as 4 Eurofighter Typhoons from No. 6 Squadron flew overhead, temporarily stealing the show. Looker's Air Show this year provided another chance for members of the squadron to observe first-hand many flypasts, and although the event was only scheduled to last 1 day, students from UGSAS committed themselves to 4 days of chauffeuring pilots who were visiting from all over the world. Many highlights were noted during the air show, including a display by the Red Arrows and also the diamond formation of the Tornadoes, which they were told would never be repeated. The day ended on a high, with the American pilots inviting students to see the interior of the McDonnell Douglas KC-10 extender aircraft, before revealing that they had actually also used it to transport in a large cargo of beers, which everyone was welcome to. 2013 seen UGSAS yet again awarded with the Hack Trophy, and in July, students took part in the annual 9 Megan March, the largest marching event in the world, lasting 4 days and 100 miles long, with students carrying an additional 10 kilograms or more of weight on their backs. This year, the team celebrated finishing the march as the fastest RAF squadron and the second fastest British military team, an outstanding success. The following year of 2013 witnessed many events across the summer period, including the annual Dragon Boat race and trips to Holland, the Dolomites and Poland, to name a few. The year ended with UGSAS throwing a leaving do for the departing officer commanding Squadron Leader Mullen, who was soon to be leaving, but also, unbeknownst to the squadron, also soon to return. Command of UGSAS was now taken over by Officer Commanding Squadron Leader Stuart Roxburgh, or Roxy as he was known by those familiar to him. Having previously been in the cadets and also a student of UGSAS, Squadron Leader Roxburgh studied aerospace engineering at the University of Glasgow before receiving a cadetship to join the Royal Air Force as a pilot. He had high ambitions at the time to support the efforts of the Cold War, with aims of flying nuclear bomb aircraft Buccaneer bombers from Germany in support of the Western world. Squadron Leader Roxburgh graduated from initial officer training in the 3rd Tucano course of 1990 to 1991 at Church Fenton, before completing a 6-month holding post at the Joint Operations Centre in Cyprus. He then returned to the UK to complete multi-engine training at RAF Finley in 1992, before volunteering to fly the Nimrod. According to Squadron Leader Roxburgh, the Nimrod was his primary aircraft of choice, mostly because it had the biggest bomb bay that any aircraft in the RAF had at the time. He completed his training at RAF Kinloss to join 206 Squadron, flying Nimrods. Squadron Leader Roxburgh then continued to have an extensive career, becoming an aircraft commander, crew captain, becoming involved in multiple search and rescue missions, and completing tours in Europe, North Africa and North America before becoming a qualified flying instructor at Yorkshire UAS and the boss of Liverpool and Manchester UASs, before he took up the position of role of commanding officer at UGSAS in 2015. The middle of the decade witnessed 5 students from UGSAS travelling to Vancouver Island in Canada to take part in the sea kayaking expedition, This was challenging as students had few facilities and spent 6 nights under canvas while trying to deter bears and mountain lions from camp. Along the way, the group saw some incredible wildlife, including orcas and humpbacks. 2015 continued with many students gaining their first solo flights during flying camps, and a brave few that completed the basic freefall parachuting course at Netheravon, highlighting the diversity of qualifications students can gain during their time on UGSAS. 2018 seen a change of command with Squadron Leader Roxburgh leaving UGSAS to train on the new Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircrafts before taking up the post as Aircraft Commander on 120 Squadron. Command of UGSAS then fell to Squadron Leader Christopher Bevington, who took up the position of Officer Commanding UGSAS after completing a successful career within the British Army. And 2018 was also a special year for the squadron, with the 100th anniversary of the Royal Air Force taking place. Notably, the RAF 100 aircraft tour was held at the Glasgow Science Centre for 3 days throughout August and September, and was attended by several UGSAS personnel. A collection of remarkable aircraft was showcased, including the Sopwith Snipe, Spitfire, Harrier, Typhoon and F-35 aircrafts. Personnel were period dressed to engage with the public and educate themselves on the aircraft history. Students were afforded the opportunity to attend the RAF 100 launch reception at the Scottish Parliament with Chief of the Air Staff Air Chief Marshal Sir Stephen Hillier, Lady Hillier and MSPs. The evening was a celebration of the RAF family to mark 100 years of the world's first independent air force, with groups from across the whole force and the wider community showcasing their activities. UGSAS showed off the full range of activities we do with our recruitment material alongside stands such as Flying Aces, Scottish Aviation STEM Trail and the RAF Cadets. In November, UGSAS took part in services to mark 100 years since the cessation of hostilities at the end of the First World War. The students were inspected by former Officer Commanding UGSAS Wing Commander Andrew Wallace and represented themselves with distinction on the day. Following the 3-gun salute and church service, several UGSAS students attended the World War 100 service at Glasgow Cathedral, attended by Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, Vice Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence and First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Towards the end of the decade, 2019 was the year that the British public said their final farewell to the Tornado aircrafts after they marked their retirement with a final flypast. UGSAS maintained close friendships with ex-members who had the pleasure of flying them. Wing Commander David Tate flew the Tornado GR4 aircraft between the years of 2006 and 2015. He commenced the Tornado GR4 Operational Conversion Unit in 2006 and graduated to 617 at the Dambuster Squadron at the close of the year. He then spent 3 years on 617 Squadron, undertaking operational tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as participating in large flying exercises in North America and Europe. Wing Commander Robert McClellan was a student on UGSAS from 1970 until 1973. On leaving university, he joined the Royal Air Force, where he clocked up 2,000 hours on the Tornado alone. He was one of the first instructors to form the Tri-National Tornado Training Establishment at Cottesmore. He then took on the role of Flight Commander Operations on the very first Tornado Squadron, and on the 1st of October 1986 he led the first Tornado Diamond 9 from RAF Huntington to Bruggen, and was awarded the Air Force Cross by Her Majesty the Queen. Wing Commander Dale got his fast jet wings at RAF Valley in 1992, and after completing a 2 years holding post, he also undertook the Tri-National Tornado Training Establishment at RAF Cottesmore. He then went on to have an extensive career flying Tornadoes on Operation Warden, the no-fly zone over northern Iraq, and other operations such as Operation Giral and Operation Bolton over southern Iraq. Wing Commander Matt Smith, who unlike our other featured friends of UGSAS, was not a pilot. Wing Commander Matt Smith was an engineering officer bursar on UGSAS's 66 course, graduating in 2005. He has worked on or around Tornadoes for the majority of his career to date. His first tour was as Officer Commanding General Engineering Flight at RAF Lookers. Here he commanded a flight of 90 personnel supporting the Tornado F-3 holding quick reaction alert duties at home and overseas. He then deployed to Afghanistan on Operation Herrick, where his responsibilities included the introduction of ground support capabilities required to facilitate the deployment of Tornado GR4 aircraft to Kandahar Airfield in 2008. Later in his career, Wing Commander Matt Smith had the huge privilege of being selected as the Senior Engineering Officer on 15 Reserve Squadron for the final 2 years of its time as the GR4 OCU. Although the squadron had shrunk in size since his time as a junior engineering officer, the task was still very demanding, ensuring that the Tornado Force had all the trained crews it needed to support it to its out-of-service date. 15 Reserve Squadron was the last squadron to operate the aircraft in Scotland, disbanding in March 2017.
The year 2020 would force UGSAS to live up to their motto, prepared for either event. With events such as the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic causing a considerable disruption to squadron life, and other developments such as the Royal Air Force's ambition of becoming carbon neutral in support of global efforts to tackle climate change, UGSAS had to rapidly adapt to a changing global environment. The beginning of this decade, however, started off with business as usual for the squadron, with their annual donation of tins of food to the Helping Hands Christmas food appeal at Glasgow Airport. Notable training in Glasgow included a presentation from Squadron Leader Roxburgh on the introduction of the new P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, a multi-role maritime patrol aircraft equipped with sensors and weapon systems for anti-submarine warfare, as well as surveillance and search and rescue missions. During the same period, 21 students underwent first aid training, and 4 students also travelled to Lucas to join UGSAS in training delivered by an RAF regiment officer on the basics of navigation, delivering orders, making models and tips for OASC and IoT. As the year progressed, reports of a novel virus having first been detected in China began to circulate, and by the 20th of January, the World Health Organization declared this new pathogen a public health emergency of international concern. The following day, COVID-19 was detected for the first time in the UK, and by the 29th of April, the total number of reported cases stood at over 3 million. At this point, the UK government had already implemented nationwide restrictions, forcing UGSAS and all other university air squadrons to adapt quickly to continue their work as an organisation. Travel restrictions were quickly imposed, and the adjutant UGSAS recalls the biggest challenge at the time having been the cancelling of the ski expedition, which was due to leave just 18 hours after these new travel restrictions were imposed. The staff and students were quick to adapt, however, particularly adopting a work-from-home strategy, along with implementing a detailed COVID strategy in the building. As the world adapted to the new normal, the squadron continued to remain resilient in the face of adversity, and despite new constraints imposed upon them, they were able to reach many achievements throughout the year. In April, UGSAS joined forces with 11 other university air squadrons to run a continuous relay from RAF Lossiemouth to RAF Akrotiri, all from their own gardens. The challenge took 4.5 days and raised an incredible £17,500 for NHS charities. Shortly afterwards, the squadron took part in the V75 Burpee Challenge and raised £1,500, which equates to 2,000 sets of 75 burpees. Over the summer break, many students continued to support our health services by volunteering and taking on paid roles within the NHS, such as hospital porters, healthcare support worker positions, and medical and nursing placements. The summer was also busy for the senior leadership team, as the current senior student was awarded the 2020 COMEC Leadership Prize, and the new APOs attended their APO course at RAF College Cromwell to conduct the necessary training to receive the RAF VR commission. With social distancing restrictions rendering flying impossible, the squadron implemented technological innovations to produce a flying emulator in the prayer room in an attempt to keep students up to standard with flying. UGSAS senior mentor Air Commodore Scott Miller visited the squadron for the first time and received a detailed demonstration of the emulator, while also being shown how the VR technology could be utilised to train weapons drills on an SA-80, for example. It was not only flying which was hindered by the pandemic, but also the continuation of in-person town nights at THQ. Another technological innovation that was implemented was the continuation of town nights virtually, via newly developed platforms such as Microsoft Teams. Additional measures were developed in order to maintain a high standard of morale within the students, as many were left isolated from their peers either in their hometowns and in cities, or within university accommodation. Holding nights such as the Wear It Pink for UGSAS to support breast cancer now were effective in engaging the students and keeping everyone together in this challenging time. During all of the squadron's adaptations, leadership of UGSAS also changed hands, with Squadron Leader Christopher Bevington departing in October 2020 and Squadron Leader Carl Meelan due to return as OC UGSAS in December. During the absence of an OC, Deputy OC Flight Lieutenant Mason took on the role of ensuring the running of UGSAS during this time of uncertainty. Born in Falkirk, Flight Lieutenant Mason initially completed an undergraduate degree in biology, graduating from the University of St Andrews before completing a postgraduate degree in business management at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. After a chance meeting with a recruiter, Flight Lieutenant Mason then went on to continue his career within the Royal Air Force. He initially completed Joint Elementary Flying Training School at Church Fenton on 33 long course. He then went to join Inward Fleet in 2001, flying the Nimrod aircraft. He then spent some time on 201 and 206 squadrons, completing exercises in Iraq, Afghanistan, and completing various other exercises in the Mediterranean, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. After that, taking on the role of Senior Air Operations Controller at RAF Kinloss. He completed 3 years in Afghanistan, working with kinetic security and defence contractors, before returning to the UK to complete the long QFI course, and finally joining UGSAS in March 2014. Although virtual town nights proved a raring success and served a great purpose, students were still eager to get back to face-to-face training. In November, 2 UGSAS students were able to attend a first aid course at Cranwell as part of the newly initiated Project Mercury. This innovative project aims to provide students with the necessary training throughout university in order to be streamlined efficiently through IoT upon completion of their degree. Over the next few months, several UGSAS students continued their Project Mercury training and attended new courses such as Fieldcraft and Range and Security modules conducted by the 6th FTS Force Protection Cell. As the pandemic continued, global attention also turned to face another of the challenges posed in the 21st century, climate change, or climate breakdown as it was now becoming more frequently termed as. It was becoming the centre of public attention as rising sea levels and extreme weather events became the new norm. In 2020, the RAF launched their new Astra initiative as a means of supporting global efforts to combat this new threat. Astra's main goal was to deliver a campaign to build a next-generation air force, one which is capable of combating evolving challenges and threats, all whilst being sustainable. With the forward-thinking target of net zero emissions for military aircraft by 2040, a radical restructuring of the RAF is taking place. Whether that's increasing online and virtual reality training to get recruits to the frontline faster, or utilising 3D printing technology to produce replacement parts for equipment efficiently. UGSAS are playing their part in this initiative, with the tutor training aircraft planned to be replaced by zero-carbon aircraft by 2027. The Rapid Capabilities Office is leading the task, which is part of the wider Project TELUM, to modernise elementary flying training. Revolutionary fueling techniques such as synthetic fuels are being researched, including exciting advances in waste-to-fuel technology through to electrofuels, according to Air Chief Marshal Sir Mike Wigston. The introduction of such fueling technologies would not only be sustainable, but would also result in lower maintenance, longer equipment life, and lower noise, heat, and visual signatures. The 2020s so far has not just consisted of combating new and emerging threats. However, development within the 21st century has been the new developments in space exploration, something which UGSAS also has a connection with. Dave Mackay, a former member of UGSAS, piloted the first suborbital spaceflight of space tourism company Virgin Galactic and has since become their chief pilot. Inspired to be an astronaut from a young age by the 1968 Apollo 8 mission, which flew around the moon, Scottish Highland-born Dave Mackay had a plan set in stone to make his dream a reality. As many of the astronauts flying the Apollo missions had started their careers as test pilots, Dave planned to follow the same path. He put his plan into motion by studying aeronautical engineering at the University of Glasgow from 1975 to 1979. During his time at university, he was a member of UGSAS, giving him his first experience of flying and clocking up a staggering 132 hours. Upon graduation, he followed on to a successful career in the RAF, flying Harriers at first and then completing his test pilot training in France before joining the fixed-wing test squadron and becoming commanding officer of fast jet flight. Following 16 years in the RAF, he moved on to commercial aviation, flying 747s for Virgin Atlantic. Soon, Virgin Atlantic entered talks with Scaled Composites, a US aerospace company, and Virgin Galactic was born, with the goal of developing commercial spacecraft for suborbital flights for space tourists. With Dave's history as a test pilot and connections with Virgin, he was in the right place at the right time and spent 6 years as a test pilot for Virgin Galactic. In 2011, he was promoted to chief pilot and most famously has become the first native Scot to go to space. In July 2021, Dave flew Virgin Galactic founder Sir Richard Branson into space in the Unity rocket plane. He's confident that in the future, the vast majority of the population of Earth will be able to go into space on one of these trips. Following the trip, Dave spoke about his experience, saying it affected me more than I anticipated, the incredible blackness of space. Dave Mackay is a true inspiration to UGSAS, having seized every opportunity along his path to where he is now. It's something we can all appreciate. As our reflection on the past 80 years of UGSAS comes to an end, we hope we have provided you with a comprehensive look into the life of the squadron. From a personal perspective, we have aimed to shine a light on the individuals that have crafted the squadron into the exemplary organisation which exists today. It's important to remember the people of UGSAS, the many who have epitomised our motto, prepared for either event. They are an inspiration to all current and future members of the squadron, reminding us of the standards that we must uphold and traditions that we must continue. The process of researching and writing this presentation has greatly opened our eyes, highlighting to us all just how proud we are to be part of UGSAS, and we hope that we can live up to the examples set by previous generations, allowing the squadron to prosper for many years into the future. We understand that over the past 80 years, many events have taken place on the squadron, and we hope to continue our research to update and reproduce this film in the future, creating a living account of our organisation's past. If you are a previous member of UGSAS or have any information or stories that you think would make a great addition to our records, please contact us via the following links or through our attached email. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.